Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video we explain, did Austria want the Anschluss? Immediately after the end of World War I, and especially after the peace treaty of Saint-Germain, there was a general sentiment that Austria would not be able to survive by herself. Most of the industry was now in Czechoslovakia, the best farmlands were now in Hungary, and the access to the sea and maritime trade was lost to Italy and Yugoslavia, or, at the time, to the Kingdom of Slovenes, Croats and Serbs, or SHS. So there was big support to be annexed by Germany, and the Saint-Germain prohibited this was seen as a great injustice. Fast forward a decade and a half, Austria had slowly recovered from the war. And after 1934, it was ruled by a fascist government who put a strong emphasis on an Austrian identity that very much stood independent from Germany. Now to the immediate time leading up to the actual Anschluss. Hitler put great pressure on Austria. Austrian Chancellor Schuschnigg returned home from a meeting in February 1938 fearing imminent invasion, and Austria's ally, Italy, had indicated that they would not intervene in this. So he announced, quite surprisingly, a referendum on the question if Austria should remain independent or join Austria. Hitler and his cronies were quite alarmed when they heard this, immediately trying to pressure Schuschnigg to back down. Social Democrats and Communists supported this move. When Schuschnigg announced on March 9 that the referendum should take place on March 13, this was unrealistic, as no real preparations had taken place. Rather than letting the referendum take its course, Hitler decided to invade Austria. On March 12, they did. Later, in April, the Nazis held their own referendum that was quite rigged. Now, we don't know how the referendum might have turned out. It might have given a majority for Austria or one for a union with Germany. It would certainly not have been 99.8% in either direction. But we know that Hitler considered it too great of a risk to let it run its course, which suggests that the Nazis thought the support for the Anschluss was not as great as they hoped. Again, might still have been a majority, but not one that was large enough for Hitler's taste. Generally, yes. Please keep in mind that Austria had been a part of the Holy Roman Empire, Heiliges Römisches Reich, since its very foundation as a duchy in the 10th century. What's more, the Habsburgs played an important role as one of the most influential dynasties within the HRR. The HRR was formally dissolved in 1806. And in 1815, the so-called German Confederation, Deutscher Bund, was formed that included large parts of Austria-Hungary. The Confederation was ended by the Austro-Prussian War of 1866. But in 1879 Austria-Hungary and the German Reich formed the dual alliance, Zweibund. As a defensive alliance, it was extended into the Triple Alliance in 1882 by including Italy as well. Italy defected in 1915 when it joined the Entente. This alliance was in place until the end of WW1, and with the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, which dissolved the Austria-Hungarian Empire. What remained as German Austria, i.e., Austria in its modern borders, was not just deemed too small to survive, but quite logical. Wanted to become a part of Germany. Given the history, this seemed quite a natural and logical consequence of the lost war. The support for a single German nation was overwhelming, especially in Upper Austria, Salzburg, and the Tyrol. Some plebiscites, which were not acknowledged by the victorious powers, showed support for the Anschluss ranging somewhere between 70 to 90%. In the interwar period, the Austrian Civil War of 1934, aka the February Uprising, which was a clash between the socialists and the government, further separated the political parties. Following the uprising, an authoritarian system was installed by the Fatherland Front. A Nazi coup in July 1934 was thwarted, and the Austrian government leaned heavily towards Mussolini for support of an independent Austria. When Mussolini came to terms with Hitler in 1937, when Italy joined the Anti-Comintern Pact, which was later to become the Pact of Steel, between the so-called Axis powers, the end of Austrian independence became a matter of when, not if. From 1933 to 1938, there was significant economic growth in Germany, which the Nazis naturally sold as a result of their successful politics. Austria, on the other hand, still struggled economically, in no small part due to the German economic boycott from 1933 to 1936, and large parts of the population were either in favor of the Anschluss per se, or hostile towards the Austrian government. So when in March 1938 the Nazi government pressured the Austrian government, by demanding to install the Austrian Nazi Arthur Seyss in court as new chancellor, then Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg called for a plebiscite to be held on March 13, in order to avoid a referendum that was not controlled by Hitler. The German troops crossed the Austrian border on the morning of March 12 unopposed, as the Austrian president, Miklas, did not allow the very small Austrian army to even set up a symbolic token resistance. The invading Germans were greeted by a significant number of Austrians as liberators. Especially in Upper Austria, Hitler's birth state, there was overwhelming, enthusiastic support from the population. 3 days later, Hitler spoke on the Heldenplatz, Square of Heroes, in Vienna in front of at least 150,000 cheering spectators. A plebiscite was held on April 10, and resulted in 99.7% yes votes. The voting was not secret, and the numbers were most likely manipulated to some extent. Still, even with a lot of political enemies in exile, imprisoned, or simply not willing to vote, a genuine plebiscite would still have shown a majority in favor of the Anschluss, somewhere between 55 to 65%. There was some verbal protest from Great Britain, France, and Italy. But only Mexico openly opposed the Anschluss, but no further actions were taken. This backed Hitler's opinion that the Western democracies were weak and would not stand up against him, an opinion that was solidified further by the Munich Agreement in September 1938, which led to the German annexation of the Sudetenland, a major step towards WW II.